Yeah, I wasn't going to do a whole video on this, but since my last one on sunspots, but I'm seeing a trend here, enough of, granted, very little data to go on, but I've got the conditions where I could track a set of spots in a good pattern and not only track them across one day, but across several days at the same time every morning, about 8:30 here. Of course, that's still daylight savings time, but we have the rotational motion as always, and it doesn't change much except that it does when it gets toward the end of the day. It seems like when it gets to the top of these arrows here that it wants to move this way just a smidgen. Okay, very little bit of movement at the last part of the day. And what does that mean? Just that the sun is kind of wobbling. It's not just rolling like a wagon wheel, as some people put it, but it's also, we got the the X, Y, and Z axis of motion that it's not only moving across the sky, it's rolling, and it's rolling not only clockwise, but toward and away from us and side to side just slightly. So it's got all these motions going on. And what I hadn't done all summer, and is especially good to have at the equinox, is this one day, this every 24 hours observation. And being the equinox, we would expect straighter lines of movement across the face. Well, I hadn't seen it before because conditions, and wasn't really looking for that as much as the movement in one day. And in my camera tricks video, I showed that the clockwise rotation of the sun on a given day is exactly backwards what it should be, because my camera, no matter how you look at it, is rotating. If it's rotating at all and causing this appearance of rotation, it's rotating the wrong way because my camera is going clockwise. Well, when you, as I demonstrated in an experiment at home with just a ordinary rubber ball, whichever way you twist the camera, rotate the camera, the markings on the ball go the opposite way. So if I turn my camera clockwise, the markings go counterclockwise. But since it's been demonstrated that on the Earth in the ball model that the camera is moving clockwise, then the spots must move counterclockwise, and they don't. They move clockwise. That can't be explained. I haven't seen any adequate explanation for that. And the fact that the sun is rolling a little bit here and there in all those directions, how can the Earth spin account for all of those motions? It can't. The Earth has to be wobbling like you wouldn't believe, and we would notice that because that's a change in acceleration. People say that the Earth's spin can't be felt or detected because it's consistent. It's not a change in acceleration. But by the movements of the spots on the sun, if it's all being accounted for by the movements of the Earth, then we do have changes of acceleration, and we should feel those things. Now, somebody's going to get out a calculator and try to say, oh, well, you forgot your fudge factor X and your imaginary number Y, and so therefore your argument is invalid. But I'm not buying that. I'm just going by real science and common sense to say that if there is a change in acceleration, we should notice it, and it happens every day. But the main point of today is that these spots, and I drew this bluish green line here, is apparently the sun's equator. If you remember from the model yesterday where I showed the alleged tilt of the Earth, and at the equinox we're not tilted forward or backward from the sun, we are tilted side to side. That is to say, a clock rotation from the sun. And because of that, we would expect an angled equator on the sun. And the equator, the angle I picked is based upon those yellow lines, which are the paths of the spots from one day to the next. That's a distance of 3 days, and they're going fairly in line with each other, but not at the same speed. You would expect at least these two to be about the same speed because they're the same distance from the equator, but they're not. This one doesn't move as fast. This one moves the fastest. Okay, this is the slowest. This is a medium speed, and I go by the length of the lines. Now, I had them all the same yesterday to show that those speeds are not the same, but I got rid of those and went instead with tracking each individual dot with its own line. And you can see, you know, if you just put a ruler or something against the screen and move it down to each line, they would be different lengths. And like I said, on these spots that are pretty much in line with each other, they should be moving at the same rate, but they're not. Anyway, they're moving in these straight lines, and I drew this line through the center parallel to all the lines, although these angles are slightly different. This one's going that way just a bit, and these are pretty close. And I was curious what angle this is, and lo and behold, see, we got 90 degrees here. From this line, we have 90 degrees. This is 15, right? This is 30. That could be, given variables in accuracy from exactly how horizontal my camera was, the 23.5 tilt. Could be. But which is actually tilting? Is it us or the sun? And that's the thing that even mainstream cosmology will admit. You cannot tell between whether the heavens move around the earth or the earth moves around the heavens. You cannot tell by the calculations because it's all a matter of assumptions and perspective. So, you know, whether from our perspective, everything moves around us. Okay, so since we know that every so-called photograph, every image we're shown of space or from space is CGI and or Photoshop monkeyed with in some way. It's a reenactment, an artist's depiction, or a stitching together. Now, amateur astronomers, we're still shooting through the distortion of the atmosphere. I've gone over that. But we have to make sure that all the amateurs, especially the higher end ones with all this money to spend on equipment, are being honest. And that's not a trivial thing anymore. You can't assume they're all lying, and you can't assume they're all telling the truth. So, but the problem is a lot of us who are actually questioning the paradigm aren't the ones with the big bucks to spend on, and the time to spend on good amateur astronomy. However, what little I've been able to do is just apply verifiable physics and math on what I observe at my location as consistently as I can. And that is that we have a daily variety of motions on the sun, which if the Earth is doing all the motion, then we should notice the changes in acceleration on a daily basis, but we don't. So it seems still that it is the sun that's moving over us. Otherwise, we would feel these changes of acceleration. And the fact that the camera's not causing the rotation because it's going the exact opposite way it should go, if that were the case. And I've tried it two different ways with with that ball experiment, with the camera horizontal to the ground as the direction, the bearing and elevation of the sun changes throughout the day, and doing that same exercise with the camera horizontal to the arc or elliptic of the sun. And no matter which way you do this, the rotation is going the wrong way. So now I've turned my attention to 24-hour movements of spots as opposed to hourly movements. And at least in these last few days, just past the equinox, we seem to have spot movement across the face. How far is anybody's guess? I've never been able to track spots for more than a few days at a time because of weather conditions or other life events that were going on, and I couldn't go out there with my camera. And so right now seems to be a pretty good opportunity, and we have a string of sunny days in the forecast. And as far as I know, every morning at 8:30, I should be able to go out and take a picture. So I'm going to keep adding to this and see where it goes and see if I can actually watch a spot disappear, because I've never been able to see that. Either we had a string of days between my last sighting and the next one and the spots were gone by then, or I have seen some on the very edge or limb that look like they're going off the edge of a circle or a sphere. And I don't doubt that the sun can be a spherical shape. It still doesn't mean the earth is a spherical shape, just like as many have said, you can't judge the shape of the floor by looking at the ceiling. And nature, as I've said the other day, doesn't always make spheres. It makes crystals as well. And so not everything is a sphere. Look at the so-called Milky Way in the standard model. It's a flat disk, basically. So no, nothing. Nature does not always form spheres when left to its own devices. And its own devices, by the way, are programmed. Does that mean simulation theory? Not in the slightest. It just means that this is designed. Every design is not a simulation. I think people are making a huge logical leap when they do that. At any rate, the main thing today was that I am tracking a set of spots. I've been given the opportunity to track these from one day to the next. I'm using the same setting on the camera. The moon setting on the P900 will get you there every time. I'm not changing anything. The only thing I do is, because of the size it makes the sun, there's a lot of extra black space around it, and I crop that out, partially to save file size, because this file is getting pretty big now that I'm keeping all these snapshots in. I could reduce the resolution, but I didn't want to monkey with it anymore, and I had to reduce variables. So I've done what I can so far, but I am going to keep watching, and I will watch it as long as I can. And when I've run into bad weather or whatnot, I will probably do another video, but I just wanted to update, since I just did that yesterday, on starting to track the 24-hour movement of spots. Now, what does that mean in any given model? Well, here again, for the standard model, you would always expect the spots to only go across the face, but they have all these other motions as well. Any other model, flat or otherwise, spots moving across the face doesn't really prove or disprove anything about the Earth or the heavens, only that we're watching spots go across the face of what appears to be a sphere. What does that mean, though? It certainly doesn't mean that the sun as a sphere is rotating. That's entirely possible. Why not? But it still doesn't tell us what shape the Earth is, or whether the heavens move around us or we move around the heavens. And I think the we move around the heavens has a lot more problems with it consistently than other models. I think geocentrism is, at the very least, whatever Earth shape, as I mentioned before on the double concave lens video, that doesn't matter which centrism you pick or which Earth shape you pick, you can account for what is observed, but the question is which model best fits the data without a lot of bypassing. That is to say, which model best fits Occam's razor and the scientific method. And science has to know its limits. It cannot say that its interpretations or projections are science. Just as with the creation-evolution debate, we all have the same material to look at and examine, but how we interpret how it got that way or how long it took to get that way is all over the map, because these are just people's opinions. You can't observe the past. You can only observe the present. And what I've been observing every day, every present, is that we only have facts to look at that are indisputable as far as observations go. That's the only indisputable part. The disputable part is what it means and what it can tell us about our realm. And here again, even if you believe in simulation theory, which I don't, once again, you have to get outside the realm in order to truly examine it. because you're in it. It's just like being inside of a magnifying glass and trying to figure out the world around you, or being underwater in a swimming pool and trying to judge what's going on around the surface. We're inside of it. And that's here again why I don't believe in simulation theory, or it doesn't matter, because we're part of the simulation. Therefore, what is the purpose or point of saying it's a simulation when for us it is our reality? It's a moot point and a waste of time to argue. That what we can't argue is that it is designed. But I wouldn't call it a simulation. It's our reality. Therefore, it's not a simulation. It's only simulation if you're outside of this realm and you're not a part of it. And even then, only those people from that perspective can say whether it's a quote unquote real thing. And it's even almost impossible for standard science to define real from simulation anymore. So, yeah, it's a designed clock, as the Bible calls it. If you look in Genesis 1, it says that there, well, let's just go do that. I think we've looked at this picture of the sun long enough. Let's go let me open a tab here and then open it as a separate window so I don't share my own screen. And we will go get Bible Gateway, because I don't have an Old Testament translation of my own. Maybe just go share the screen so you don't have my icon to look at while I'm doing that. And let's see if we can blow that up a bit. All right, now let's look at Genesis 1. I've read through this before, but it's always good to look at because I like to have the context as well, and there's always interesting details. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without shape and empty, without shape. So the earth existed before it had a shape. Formless and void in the King James, but without shape and empty. This is the Net Bible, New English Translation. And now is just a literary device. It doesn't mean gap theory between Genesis 1 and 2. It doesn't mean it became. Some people argue vigorously that it did. But here again, it begs the question of why the Bible would ignore such a monumental cataclysm that dwarfs the flood and mention the flood. It doesn't make any sense. I think if there was this big gap here, the Bible would have said something about it, but it didn't. It said nothing about it. And this is a book of beginnings. That's what Genesis means. Generation, to generate, to create or beget. It's all the same family of meanings. And so there, I don't believe in the gap theory, but it says the earth was made before it had a shape and substance, really. And it says darkness was over the surface of the watery deep. So then there's water, lots of it. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw the light was good, it separated light from darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. There was evening, morning, marking the first day. That phrase, evening, morning, day one, is telling you these are solar days. It is not an epoch. You can't just pick out one word. I forget what the Hebrew word is I usually know that word, but I can't think of it. Yom, yeah. And they try to say it can mean, yes, as in day of the Lord, it can mean more than one solar day, but not in this context, it doesn't. Evening, morning, day one. Evening, morning, day two. Those are solar days, and the sun hasn't been made yet, so we can really call them solar days. They're Earth rotations, I guess you could say, if you were using the standard model, or heavenly rotations, or, the heavens weren't even made yet. So what do you call it here? It's just the first day. Days as we know them, which we mark by what God is going to add later. But Moses, in writing this, is saying how long it took by the things we do have to tell time, even before that time existed. Anyway, God said, let there be an expanse, or firmament, firmamentum in the Latin, is from the Greek, or the Hebrew word rakia, and I would have to look up what that is in the Septuagint for the Greek. I've done that before. I don't want to take the time right now, but an expanse in the midst of the waters and let it separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated water under from the water above. So this is not dry land from oceans. That will be done later. And this is waters above, waters below. And so God calls this expanse the sky. And then we're going to find out what's in the sky, the expanse. So evening, morning, second day, then God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place. So there was one ocean. It wasn't all split up. And let dry ground appear. It was so God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the land produce vegetation, plants yielding seeds according to their kinds, trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. It was so. And skip a little bit, and there was evening and morning the third day. God said, let there be lights. Here we go. Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky. It's in the firmament, in the sky. That's where the lights are. Not the light of the first day, other lights. Okay, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky, and here's the purpose. To separate day from night, and let them be signs to indicate seasons and days and years. And some people say that know Hebrew, that the seasons means appointed times that have to do with festivals. Be that as it may, that the purpose of the lights in the sky is to indicate seasons / festivals, days, years, separate day from night, and let them serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. So they give light on the earth and tell us the days and seasons and so forth. So they have these two main purposes. They serve as a clock and calendar and lights. Okay, now granted, nothing but the moon at night shows light on the earth. If you didn't have, in a new moon, it's really dark on the earth. And so the point being that these stars, so-called stars and planets, and the word planet is from the Greek word that means wanderer. And that's why the planets were originally called wandering stars, wandering points of light. And star is astro in the Greek, just by the way. So anyway, God made the greater light to rule over the day. And some people say, no, that's not the sun, it's something else. I think that's have the burden of proof to say it's something else. He made two great lights, the greater light to rule over the day, lesser light to rule over the night. That's the sun and moon. He made the stars also an afterthought. I've been to the Creation Museum, and they have an awesome planetarium there, actually, with very comfortable seats. And you lay down, you could go right to sleep easily, very soft seats. But you get this awesome graphics show, and it will tell you, from a biblical perspective, but a heliocentric one, a creationist heliocentric one, which is wholly inconsistent. But nonetheless, it's very well done, and it takes you on this journey from Earth to the farthest reaches of the universe, how tiny, 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 infinitesimally tiny the Earth is, and how they kind of chuckle at the thought that God just says here, he also made the stars. Because according to that model, the stars are the great bulk of the universe, and God made them for no other purpose than to tell the times and seasons on the Earth. It makes no sense at all to be that vast and that big and that far away. And the Bible here is just by describing the stars as almost an afterthought, is not indicating in any way this vastness of size and distance that even young Earth creationists believe. So it's important to note in here in Genesis, if we look at it consistently as a historical narrative, that the stars are not all that important other than their function of telling the days and seasons. Okay? And more the seasons than anything else. But you can also tell roughly the time of night by where the constellations are as they rotate around the observable disk of the Earth's surface. So there was evening and morning the fourth day, and then, the next day God puts life in the water, the swimming things, great sea creatures, And then he also makes birds, and every winged bird according to its kind, to fly in the sky. And God said to them, blessed, and said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth fill the water in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And I looked for, let's see, where was it? I think the wording here is a little different, but in one of the translations, it gave the impression that birds fly along the edge of the expanse of the sky. That is to say, where the sky meets the earth. So that's the atmosphere, I guess, is how they would describe atmosphere in those days. To them, everything above the earth was the sky, and they made no difference really between where the birds fly and where the sun, moon, and stars are, the luminaries. So anyway, that was the fifth day, and then the living creatures. And the living creatures on the earth are made the same day, the sixth day, as human beings, which is interesting. But all of that just to say what the purpose is of the sun, moon, and stars, and where they are, and that planets are simply lights in the sky that move and don't hold constellations, don't hold their place. They move around. That's all it is. Anyway, so back to the sun again. The fact is, I guess I can put that up somewhere. Let me stop presenting that and go get the other one again. I don't think anybody's come late, but there you are, back to the paths, as I was saying earlier, that those yellow lines are over the course of 3 days, and I'll keep tracking. And we'll see where they go, but what that means is the big question. I don't know whether moving across the face really has anything to do with Earth motion. I don't think it does, because, like I said, we would be feeling those changes of acceleration, and we're not. So it must be the sun moving. So any way you look at it, whether the sun is a sphere or not, whether it rotates on its axis or not, and the fact that it rotates like a clock, clockwise instead of counterclockwise, in spite of the fact that my camera is apparently moving also clockwise, all that's telling me that the sun has a variety of motions across the sky. And I would like to also do this spot tracking over as long as possible, many days, at the next solstice. Now, that's not going to happen here in the winter. I'll have to wait till next summer and see if I can remember to track spots from one day to the next, and hopefully we can get a string of sunny weather that I can track them for. I would like to track at least 5 or 6 days. It looks like I will be able to now, but I need to compare this to a solstice. So even then, suppose it turns out that they have a little bit less speed and more arc in their path than they do at the equinox. It still does not prove the standard model, because here again, it doesn't say anything about what shape the Earth is, or whether the heavens move around us or we move around the heavens. That's the bottom line, and we have to separate science and observation from speculation and imagination. So take a look at the chat real quick. I don't know if there's any Bible topics anybody wants to talk about. Let's see. Somebody retracted a bunch of messages for some reason. All right. I didn't do it. So it's been brought up to me privately about different prophecy views and how there's historicism. I know I did one that I compared, I think, the different rapture views, but those are all futurist views. And in the distant past, I don't know how many decades ago, I did study the various, like amillennialism, historicism. So anytime, I think the main difference between, if just going on memory here, between amillennialism and historicism is that with amillennialism, they pretty much allegorize everything, that nothing is to be taken literally, as relating to anything in history, it's just, or future, it's just moral lessons. And that's pretty much, I think, the Roman Catholic position is amillennial. And they may also overlap. Some groups of them or anybody else also have the historicist view, which is not same as preterism. Historicists believe there was future prophecy that wasn't fulfilled in the first century, as opposed to preterism or full preterism. Historicists believe there were literal fulfillments of Revelation and Daniel, but that they happened slowly through the intervening millennia between the first century and now. We've gone almost 2 millennia. And that's what historicism is. It's a very gradual playing out, such that by now we're probably at the end of the prophecies. But I haven't spent much time on those because, for a variety of reasons, I find them in conflict with Scripture and history. And I find some of the attempts to make things match up with history force-fitted, begging the question, so to speak. And so I've pretty much abandoned those. I think the Bible's past fulfillments have been very literal and not so terribly gradual. And when something's going to take a long time, they tell us, just like Daniel was told to seal up the prophecies, and Revelation was the unsealing. And the church age was not foreseen as far as humans were told clearly. Nobody expected 2 comings of the Messiah. They did expect one. And while there were a lot of people, especially the so-called, scribes and Pharisees, that were not paying attention, there were a few people noted, such as Anna and what was the other guy's name? Oh man, my memory's going. But anyway, wasn't Zacharias. Anyway, another guy, there was Anna and this other guy at the temple who had both been expecting the Messiah, and the guy was told in a dream or vision that he would not die until he saw the Lord's anointed, and he was very old by that time, so was Anna. And the baby Jesus was brought to the temple for dedication, and then he said he knew now that he was going to die because this promise had been fulfilled. Anyways, people were looking, but they weren't looking for 2 comings. Even after Jesus rose from the dead, in the very first verses of Acts, the disciples are like, so right now, are you going to set up the kingdom? And Jesus brushed that off and said, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons, but just wait here for the Holy Spirit. And that's what happened. So the church age was not clearly portrayed in the Old Testament, if at all. There are some references that in hindsight we could take that way, but certainly no one anticipated it, and it had to be that way. And so here we are in the church age, which has nothing to do with Bible prophecy. And the only prophecies that concern the church were given by Paul and John. And even John's was mostly about Israel. There's the 7 letters to the churches, and then you don't see the word church on the earth at all until the very end after the millennium. And so, because the church is only mentioned again after chapter 3, when in conjunction with the New Jerusalem coming down at the end of the millennium. So if you want to know about prophecies for the church, you have to read Paul, pretty much. And he says nothing about any of the disasters, signs, markers, anything like that. He just says there's going to be a shout, a trumpet, and the dead in Christ will rise. And then the living will be transformed in the twinkling of an eye. And then we all rise, are snatched up to meet Jesus in the air. This is not, nobody can fake that. The so-called fake alien invasion to come will not be able to duplicate the rising of all Christians, only Christians, from the past 2,000 years, from the dead, and then the living are transformed into immortals, and then we're snatched. We're not asked any questions. Whoever belongs to Jesus will be taken. And so there's a blessing for looking for that. Paul said that there's a crown of righteousness awaiting not only him, but everyone who longs for his appearing. So, yeah, the rapture itself is a signless event. And here again, I did mention this a couple of videos ago about the hype over the September 23rd sign, that it is a sign, as I've emphasized many times, a sign points to something coming. And some people even question whether it's a sign, and that's a legitimate question, because the passage in chapter 12 of Revelation, and why don't I just go get that? Let me get back to the Bible Gateway page. If I can just find it here. There we go. Let's go get Revelation 12. I'll just stay here because it's right there. It's convenient. And that's where we have the woman, the child, and the dragon. It doesn't specifically say there's a sign in the stars, but it doesn't mean it can't be, okay? I'm just saying it's a possibility that it does, with everything else, seem to be a sign. I mean, we're having these eclipses over the U.S., making an X over the New Madrid 7 years apart. We've had the first eclipse, and then we had, all in this month, the beginning of the Jewish New Year, the Feast of Trumpets, the equinox, and this particular constellation all at the same time. I think between that and the freak storms and the big earthquakes in Mexico and all those things, that, and all the goings on in the Middle East, that collectively the Christian community should be looking, should be aware of what's going on in the world. And these are all signs in a way, so put together. But the passage itself right here really doesn't speak of stars other than naming, you know, that it says sun, moon, crown of 12 stars, and another sign appeared in heaven. Now, does that mean in the heavens as far as the, you know, the sky, or does it just mean where John is receiving his vision? You can take it both ways, and it really doesn't materially affect the prophecy. I'm just saying that all of these things, this is called a sign. Whether it's also in the stars literally or not is up for debate. But here again, like I said, it doesn't materially affect the message of, you know, the prophecy here. So if we look at that passage of the alignment that just happened, it can fit. There's certainly a lot of convergence there. It doesn't have to. And it's at Revelation 12, which I've gone over before, and I've pointed to another video that does a good job of mapping out the what I used to call flashbacks or parentheses in Revelation. The middle of Revelation has a lot of signs in it. This is one of them. And it looks back to the beginning of the revelation, to the tribulation. It looks forward. A lot of these signs do that. It's like with the two witnesses, and I think chapter 6, where we find out that they had a 3.5-year ministry, and they were killed when the beast rises to power, which happens at the midpoint, because that's the abomination, and that's when the remnant of Israel sees the abomination and takes off and are protected for 3.5 years. So we have all these markers telling us where the middle of the tribulation is in Revelation. And that's about where we're seeing, you know, that's where we find out the two witnesses are killed, and they had been active for 3.5 years. So it looks back, it tells you, figure it out. They started their ministry 3.5 years earlier. And there's no need for two witnesses in Israel while the church is still here. So we're not here for 7 years of tribulation, not just the last 3.5, not just the last day. There's no overlap between two witnesses and the witness of the church. They're redundant. And there are other witnesses in tribulation as well. There's these angels and eagles flying and all sorts of things. And people know what's going on. They don't need the church here to serve as witnesses of Jesus' resurrection anymore. It would be painfully obvious to the people on earth. But so this sign, like the two witnesses thing, we find it at the midpoint of the book of Revelation. And the timeline, if we follow it sequentially, when we have these things that are kind of multi-sequentially, that is to say, they sit atop the sequence and they tell you to look back and look forward. And that's what this Revelation 12 thing is doing. And I've heard people try to, as I said, interpret the interpretation, which is very nonsensical. But then I hear this from people who don't believe in sense. They don't believe in rationality. They believe in solipsism. I went all over that. But I might as well just kind of read through this, and then I'll go look for chapter 6 for a second. And I'm going to have to go pretty soon. But It says that a great sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. And as I've said before, this is very symbolic, matching up with Joseph in the Old Testament and the dreams he had of the sun, moon, and stars, 11 stars bowing to him, which happened in Joseph's future when his brothers hated him and sold him into slavery. He was taken to Egypt. Then the people of the Hebrews had a famine, and they wound up coming to Joseph, who by that time, many years later, they thought he was dead, long dead. And he turned out to be second in command to Pharaoh himself. And because of that, they did not recognize him. He was all dressed up as an Egyptian official, and they bowed low before him. And when the rest of his family came, because Joseph promised them, choice land and food so they wouldn't starve, they all bowed to him and fulfilled his dream. And that's what this sign, in the Bible's perspective, in the Bible's context, which is where it belongs, is telling us this is Israel. That's what this sign is telling us. The woman with the sun and the moon and the 12 stars. Okay? That's Joseph's father, Jacob / Israel. That was his name. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who God renamed Israel, which means he struggles with God. His parents are the sun and the moon, and his brothers were the stars. And so he, being the 12th son, is the 12th star. Well, actually, he was the 11th, but the 11 other sons, he had 11 brothers, and including him, that makes 12. So this is a clear indication of the nation of Israel, in my opinion. Yes, there are other opinions. This is mine. I don't, if you want somebody else's opinion, we'll have to go someplace else. But she was pregnant and screaming in labor pains. It could, just speculating at this point, she was oppressed by Rome when Jesus came. Okay. So she was struggling to give birth, and then another sign appeared in heaven, a huge red dragon that had 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its heads were 7 diadem crowns. There's also Old Testament references to this sort of thing. This is Satan and or earthly puppets, if you will, of Satan. And now this Satan himself is obvious here in verse 4, though. The dragon's tail swept away the third of the stars in heaven and hurled them to the earth. We know from other references as well that a third of the angels fell with Satan. They aligned themselves with him. And so this is all stuff that people would know in the first century. They would know that these symbols are applying to Israel and to their great adversary. And then it says the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child as soon as it was born. Well, we can relate that very clearly to the fact that Herod in the first century tried to kill Jesus after the Magi left and took off without telling him where he was, because they had stopped to see him to find out where this child of promise was born. And he told them to report back to him when they found him, and they were warned in a dream not to. And then Herod got really incensed, and because they were told that Herod had no good intentions. He lied when he said he wanted to go worship the child. In fact, he wanted to kill the child, and they escaped. And then he killed every child under 2 years old in Judea in the hopes of wiping him out. So, but of course, Joseph was warned in the dream to take Mary and the child and run to Egypt for a while. And so the point being that he did try to kill the child as soon as he was born. So yes, this is Jesus, but that isn't all, because Jesus is the head of the church. Okay, the Bible teaches that very clearly. You can't have a head without a body. You can't have a body without a head. They both go together. So where the head is, there is the body. So it can also and must also refer to the body of Christ, which is the church. So while we have this literal, all of this description telling us that Israel produced the Messiah who was the head of the church, the woman gave birth to a son, a male child who's going to rule over the nation with a rod of iron, but that also includes us because we are his body, and we will rule and reign with him. I showed that, I think, the other day. I showed it to somebody. I don't remember if I did it in the Hangout or not, but we will rule and reign with him. So at any rate, this italics here that they have in this particular version is telling you that they're quoting an Old Testament reference. Okay, so she gives birth to this Messiah, and this part is what did not happen. Her child was suddenly caught up to God and to his throne, and she fled into the wilderness where a place had been prepared for her by God so that she could be taken care of for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. So this is the point I was talking about, where it, first of all, the vision, the sign, I should say, tells you who we're talking about. Okay, by the symbolism that people of the first century would have known, the people of Israel, and the early Christians, of course, who mostly were still Jews in that day, they were all very familiar with the Old Testament, and they knew who this was. They would immediately think of Joseph and him being one of the 12 sons of Israel, and their mother, I think, was Rachel of, well, Rachel had Benjamin and Joseph, but Leah, her sister, had the rest of the sons. Anyway, the text here is telling you who this is, and then saying that this nation produced the Messiah, who produced the church, because with the head is born first. In any birth, the head comes out first most of the time. This is the great majority of the time, the head comes out first and is the source of the body. That's what the word kephali, or head, meant in the first century. And anytime people, this is a pet peeve of mine, is it's a very dangerous twist when people try to insert what is called an anachronistic fallacy. They try to insert later meanings of head as boss onto the first century meaning, which it did not mean. It meant source or origin or originator or author. And so we see this birth. The head comes out first, and the Messiah is born. It's clear the Messiah coming from Israel. But who is it that flees, and well, first of all, who was it that was suddenly caught up to God in his throne? Not Jesus. He was not caught up to God in his throne when he was born. He was allowed to grow to adulthood, and then he had things to do, and then he was killed, and then he rose again, and then he went up to heaven. Even he didn't go directly up to the throne of God at his resurrection, because when Mary saw him in the garden, thinking he was the gardener at first, and he said her name, and she said, "My Lord and my God," and he says, "Don't keep holding on to me. I have not yet returned to my Father." So this did not fulfill in the first century. This part did not fulfill. And we know that from Daniel's prophecy, chapter 9 especially, that even within a sentence, there can be a past and a future fulfillment. So we know in hindsight that the child Jesus was not immediately caught up to God in his throne. And even after his resurrection, it took some time. I think he was on earth 40 days, actually, before the disciples watched him go up in the clouds. So that part was not fulfilled in the past. Therefore, who is this child now that is suddenly caught up? Well, the church was born. You could say it too was not suddenly caught up, but the church is not completely grown up yet, is it? Paul said that God had partially blinded Israel until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled, and until the full number of Gentiles has come in. Like a ship's complement of sailors, it can't set sail without the number of hands on deck. That's the indication we get in the Greek, where Paul talks about the fact that there has to be a certain number of Gentiles brought into the church before it can leave. And then it will be suddenly caught up to God and to his throne. So that's a future fulfillment. And it's indicating in this whole sign that Israel gave birth to the Messiah, the head and the body followed, and then when it's completely born, that is to say the head and the body are finished, then it will be caught up to God in his throne quite suddenly. And that's the word of, it's not harpazo, it's a snatch, but the other word is tachos, means suddenly, not necessarily quickly. It's where we get our word tachometer, but it means all of a sudden. Okay. And then who is she in verse 6? Not the church. We are the child. We and Christ are the child. She, the woman, Israel, after this event, sometime after this event, we don't know how much time, and when you think about it, 3.5 years is not a long time prophetically, because if this is the midpoint of the tribulation, which it is, then the fact that the rapture would happen 3.5 years earlier is certainly within the realm of suddenly, prophetically speaking, when we're talking about such a long period of time. And so she fled into the wilderness where a place prepared for her by God so she could be taken care of for 1,260 days. These are the people who are protected during the Great Tribulation. They are Jews in Judea who are told to flee to the wilderness. And this did not happen in the first century. It was only Christians who fled because they were the only ones looking for the sign that Jesus said. The Jews weren't paying attention to what Jesus said, that is to say the non-saved Jews, that is to say the non-Christians. And so only the Christians fled, and they did not go to the wilderness, and they did not go to the high places, to the mountains. They went to a relatively low-lying city called Pella, I think it was. I went into that in one of my prophecy writings. And so this has not happened yet. This is a future event. It has not happened in history. So much for amillennialism or historicism. These things have not happened yet. So, and even in the first century, there was no abomination of the temple. Titus did not set up an idol, did not declare himself God, and did not sacrifice an unclean animal on the altar. So that did not fulfill the prophecy of Daniel. Even though Antiochus Epiphanes did all of those things, Jesus spoke of a yet future fulfillment, and Jesus came several hundred years after Antiochus Epiphanes. So everything considered, this indicates to me a very future event, and that the sign of the woman, the child, and the dragon points to something in the middle of the tribulation. That's why nothing happened right now. So the point still remains that when it comes to the rapture, that can happen anytime. Anytime. And there are people who don't like that idea. They want to force the church into the fulfilling the feast of Israel, and they forget the difference between the two, or they reject the difference between the two. And this is why they keep being wrong about their date setting. Even rapture believers, they're being very inconsistent, the ones who set dates, because they're so enamored with Israel and its feasts that they ignore the fact that we're not Israel and these things don't apply to us, although we look for these signs because we know that our redemption is even nearer. It has to precede it. And I don't see any way around this. And this is why so many people who were so absolutely certain that the rapture was going to be on the 23rd have egg on their face once again, and making the rest of us look bad. And there are so many people, unbelievers, who don't know the Bible at all and think they're experts, who somehow got the idea that all Christians were expecting the end of the world on the 23rd, which isn't even true of the date setters. Nobody expected the end of the world. So it's a twisted mess of people who think they know things they don't know. And this is why you have to pay attention, to use a phrase I know especially like to use, the devil's in the details, because what that means is that if you look closely at all the details, you get a much different picture than the surface skimming method, whether you're talking about the Bible, prophecy, or sunspot movements. And for latecomers, let me bring that up once again. I keep switching back and forth between the two. But just, you can always watch this later, of course, but I'll just show this again real quick. This is my observations of sunspots. I had been doing the curved arrows are one day, was 3 days ago. And I watched this set of spots go in these directions for those distances. These angles are 15 degrees apart. And that's how they do every day. They start out at the roughly the same locations, and they go around. And I've gone over all that. You can play back later. This bluish green line in the middle is what I believe to be the sun's equator. because of these yellow lines. These yellow lines are tracking 3 individual spot groups over 3 days. From my location at the same time every morning, 8:30 in the morning, I go out with my camera, and we've had very happy that we've been blessed with a long string of sunny days and spots to watch. That's exactly what I wanted for the equinox. And I want to do this again next summer solstice. Because like I said, trying to watch this in the winter solstice is, the odds are not very good. But someone in the southern hemisphere might want to do this. But anyway, what I'm doing now, because this clockwise rotation is indisputable on a daily basis, so what I'm doing now is tracking spots every morning at the same time. And I've got 3 spots so far. So I got these lines, and they don't move the same distance. Even the ones that are roughly the same distance from the solar equator, as it appears to be to me, they don't move the same speed or distance, of course. But they are moving that way, across, in roughly in line with this, which, as I noted, happens to be about 23.5 degrees off 90. Because if you look at the standard heliocentric model, we are supposedly at the equinoxes facing the sun roughly like this. But here again, even if the sun is a sphere, which I think it might be, from all appearances that I've been able to observe myself, whether through the camera or a scope, so there's no electronics involved in the scope. I double, triple, quadruple checked this stuff all summer. The sun appears to be a sphere. That doesn't mean the Earth is a sphere. As I said earlier, you can't look at the ceiling and expect to know what the floor is shaped like. And even mainstream astronomy will admit that when it comes to calculations of the observations, you can't tell whether it's the Earth moving or the sky's moving. And even there was a hint of that in the Star Trek movie where Spock is hurled back in time and he winds up on this snowy planet where he meets Scotty. And Scotty, he told Scotty he was going to make a breakthrough in beaming people from one moving ship to another by the realization that if all you have to do is think of it, instead of the ships moving, you think of space moving. So the calculations work either way, whether it's heliocentric or geocentric. And like I said, when it comes to Earth movement, they tell us we don't notice the spin because it's no change of acceleration, and I agree with that. But when we look at the sun and how it moves daily or from one day to the next, which is to say hourly or every 24 hours, the movements in 3 axes, actually 4 when you count the clock rotation, are changes of acceleration, and we should notice those if it's the Earth that's spinning. Because the Earth wouldn't just be spinning on its axis, it would also be wobbling, and it would go back and forth on every given day, and we would notice that change of acceleration. We don't. Therefore, it's the sun that is moving and wobbling and rolling above us. So at the very least, I think these observations are consistent with geocentrism, regardless of Earth shape. And I'm not going to quibble over Earth shape until we establish geocentrism. You have to take things in steps. You can't go, anybody who's had a baby knows that you can't go from milk to steak in a day. You have to take people slowly. And the first thing you have to do is tell them why heliocentrism does not meet observations. And you have to tell them with a lot of data. I wish a lot more people were doing these same things. And then you fill the vacuum with the next idea, which would be geocentrism, which the movie The Principle is trying to do. Then you look at Earth shape. But here again, you're going to have to get outside the realm to really study the realm, because of all the distortions that I've gone over with atmospheric or optical or magnetic lensing. And by the way, I think it was either Dr. Zach or one of that group of people who liked my idea of the double concave lens because it fits with the experiment they did recently in a video where they showed that you need a concave lens to account for example, the maybe real, maybe fictitious Eratosthenes experiment with the sun shadows and the sticks in the ground. And they did very controlled experiments to scale, or just a scale model of with very precise measurements of shadow lengths and shadow directions and that sort of thing, and showed that you need lensing to account for it. You can't just use, because if a ball Earth is one way, but it's not the only way, and you can do the same thing with a flat Earth and a concave lens. But like I said, when it comes to concave lenses, if you have a double concave between the Earth and the Sun, you can have any Earth shape you want. But you still have geocentrism. And I think we need to establish that point first. And I think, here again, as I'm watching these sunspots, we have all sorts of movements of the sun that indicate it's not the Earth moving, and that spots do, as I've been questioning because I hadn't had the opportunity to observe long enough before, do they ever move across the face? And I'm hoping I get a number of days in a row so I can either see the spots move from one edge to off the other, or that they disappear suddenly in the middle of a movement. Because when do spots disappear? In the past, it's always seemed to happen at night where I am, or on a cloudy day. I'm watching sunspots, and then the next time I'm able to see them, they're gone, and I'm like, what happened to them? I have seen spots that were just about over the edge that I watched for a couple of days, and they look like they're going off the edge of a sphere, okay? But what did they do before that? And do all spots only disappear when they're on the side of the sun we're not seeing? That wouldn't make any sense at all. I want to see them disappear from one day to the next. And if they disappear during the night, I'm just like, that is not fair. Somebody on the other part of the world where the sun is up when it's there, when it's not up here, I want them to be doing this. I want to see the spots disappear. But this is such a slow experiment. It's frustrating. But let's see. Look at the chat. There's more people. I'm trying to say hi to people in the chat. I've been kind of distracted. It's hard when you're managing windows and all that, but at least I don't have a busy chat. Oh, we got up to 9 today. That's unusual. Yeah, imminence. Yeah, lateral movement. Yeah, I've seen all the Star Trek, the Star Wars. I don't know how many times I saw the original 3 Star Wars. Galaxy Quest, of course, is my favorite of all of them. And it's a very interesting movie because toward the end, the protagonist is telling his friend who thought all these TV shows were real, that it's all fake. The ship is only as big as this, little model, and we use Christmas tree lights and this and that and the other, and all the people are, the scientists are fake, the astronauts are fake. And he says this all. And of course, in the movie, they say, no, it's all real. But I think they're, once again, saying something without saying it. But here again, another principle, the other side of the story is that people think they're getting truth from Hollywood, but lies from the Bible. So, and they recognize that the powers that be lie to them, and NASA lies to them all the time. So it goes to, it should be a reasonable projection to say that NASA will always lie to them. And yet here they are, knowing that the powers that be sometimes tell the truth in Hollywood, and yet the Bible consistently has been shown to tell the truth, yet people refuse to project to the future that the Bible, his remaining prophecies, will continue to tell the truth. They're just like, no, I still can't prove it true. I can't prove it false, but I can't prove it true. That's inconsistent, because if we can project NASA's future behavior on its past behavior, because we've got a lot of data collection to go on, then the same is true of the Bible. And so if the Bible has always been consistently accurate, then it will always be consistently accurate on at least as good a basis as the logic for saying that NASA has always lied, therefore they will always lie. I don't see why people change the rules when they get to the Bible. They always do. It's just not logical. As far as the sun being projection, a projection needs a source, and everybody will say the source is someplace we can't go, which to me is special pleading. It's a fallacy. Just like when people use the eternal regression or endless regression theory to say, well, something came before something else became something else before something else. That doesn't answer any questions at all. It's just moving the goalposts to a place no one can examine them, and it's just a wish and a story at that point. So as the sun is projected, we must find the projector. And if everybody says it's in a place we can't go, then it remains a story. I don't call anything proof without hard evidence. And we do have hard evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. There's what I mean by hard evidence is also good forensic evidence. Or otherwise it would be impossible to ever convict anyone of any crime, because you have circumstantial evidence, you have eyewitness testimony. We have all those things for Jesus rising from the dead. We don't have those things for a projector of the sun, moon, and stars, like a planetarium. You have to find the projector. You have to find any kind of circumstantial evidence, eyewitness testimony, something to go on besides a belief that they're a projection. Now, their properties are such that they, especially the moon, its properties perplex me. It looks every way I can look at it to be something that froze in time in either its formation or the cataclysm of the flood that caused electrical arcing. It has all the characteristics of electrical arcing on certain materials that will form those so-called craters with the raised dot in the middle. And everyone has seen the fact that all of these craters would have to be, if they were impact craters, would have to be 90-degree hits every time, and we never see them happen anymore. They're not impact craters. That is as certain as we can be about anything, as besides, beyond going to the moon with people we trust and taking a sample of it to know what it's made of. It has characteristics that defy explanation, because since when it's not full, as I've said many times before, it looks like a sphere with an external light causing the surface shadows. When it is full, and only when it is full, it does not act like a sphere or externally lit, because it does not have a hot spot. It does not fall away in brightness from the center to the edge. As far as I can tell, I need to take some more shots of full moon. And here again, the full moon shouldn't be possible if the sun is directly behind the earth, and the earth is between the sun and the moon. That should be an eclipse, but it isn't. And if the sun is at some angle to fully light the moon, then why don't we see the edge drop off, Terminator kind of shadow, even a little bit? The full moon is a puzzle, a mystery, an enigma, as I called it in one of my videos. So what the moon is made of, how it's lit, those are mysteries, but that doesn't mean it's a projection. And the eclipse was also very interesting in a number of levels. It still doesn't make it a projection. It could make it interdimensional. I don't know. But I can look at it with my camera. Like I said, I can take the moon setting on the P900 and watch the sun. They both come, they're a little bit different size, which is what I would expect. Even on flat Earth, I would expect the sun to go behind the moon at times for like an eclipse. And if it's behind and yet appears to be the same size, it must be a little bit bigger. And that's pretty much what I see when I say moon mode, go, okay, on the camera, and it zooms in on it automatically because it thinks it's looking at the moon. When I aim this thing at the sun, it's slightly bigger, but not very much. And the focus length is the same, and the exposure is the same. It thinks it's looking at the moon. Now, the moon's brightness can vary a little bit, so it may be adjusting somewhat, and I'd have to look at the EXIF data to see. But the fact is that the camera knows no difference between the sun and the moon. So they're close together, slightly different inside. The sun's slightly bigger, in my opinion. And in my opinion, from all the observations I've done all summer, they go around us, the stars go around us, the planets, which means wanderer, are also lights in the sky that go around us. And you can zoom in on the planets, but you really can't zoom very much on the stars. Different materials could account for that. Doesn't even have to be a different distance. And like I said before, I have seen with my telescope back when the tracking used to work, stripes on Jupiter, not in much detail, but I saw stripes on Jupiter. I've seen the moons, and they appear to be sometimes phased like our moon, but phased in the light coming from Jupiter, not the light coming from the sun. And Jupiter should not be that bright. None of the planets should be that bright. They're not all looking at the sun fully all the time. They should all have phases, but they don't. Anyway, because if they were getting the light from the sun. So they're not. They're emitting their own light as far as anybody can tell. But they're wanderers. That's why they're called planets. The Earth is not a planet because it doesn't wander. In my opinion, I am a geocentrist. So anyway, let's see. More people in chat. See if I can type right here and try to roll the chat without losing it. It's going to do it. I know it is. So we do have lateral movement of the spots. We have clock rotation of the spots. We have all sorts of movement going on in the sun, which, like I said, on a daily basis or day to day, we should notice. If the Earth is causing all of this, we should notice the changes of acceleration, and we don't. Let's see, looking more at the chat. Didn't roll your eyes. Very good discipline. I have trouble not rolling my eyes these days. The new moon, I don't know. You can see faintly sometimes the moon. I like I said in one of my recent videos, I could see when I did filters and levels on one of my own moon shots from a few days ago, the dark part that wasn't lit. Obviously, that's redundant, but it, meaning the moon was in phase, it was not full, and I could see the faint outlines of a couple of craters, and some with the raised dot in the middle. Therefore, I have rejected the idea that when the moon is not full, that the dark part is indeed there. The whole moon is there. It doesn't just disappear. That disappearing idea is actually from quantum physics. There's a site called Common Sense Science, I think it's .info or .org, that has a quote from physicists saying that the moon is not there when nobody looks at it. That is, as demonstrated very thoroughly by Truth is Stranger Than Fiction in his full-length documentary Ethereal, the old religious ideas about the Gnostic, Luciferian, theosophical ideas of reality, and that's what is being packaged for the Western world as cosmology and quantum physics. And so the fact that things are only there if you look at them is not a scientific idea. It is a religious idea, in my opinion. So I always add that. That's all anybody has is their opinions. He and she, you got to be careful once again with those pronouns, because grammatical gender is not biological gender by any stretch. It's more on the yin and yang idea, and of course, always female is dark. On the bad underside, auxiliary side of things, they put the female all the time. False religion. But anyway, as I've explained before in the distant past, that in Hebrew, for example, a man's hand is called she. Okay, in Hebrew, the Holy Spirit is she. In Greek, the Holy Spirit is it. And that same entity, the Holy Spirit, and the one time it's called the Comforter. Comforter is a masculine noun, therefore the pronoun is masculine in only that case. In every other case, you will find it for the Holy Spirit, the pneumos, and she for the Comforter. Okay? So I don't get hung up on pronouns, masculine, feminine, neuter, on these words. They just don't have any significance as to the nature of the entity. Yeah, God is spirit. He has no gender. Jesus was incarnated and in a body. It had to be one or the other and happened to be male. So that's the only sense in which we can speak. We can say that Jesus, we can say he and mean it biologically. But of course, now he's in his resurrected immortal body, and in heaven there is no marrying. And so what's the point of gender there? I don't believe there's any spiritual gender or immortal gender. Do I think the stars are angels? Certainly stars and angels are well connected in the scriptures in both testaments. Whether they are angels, I don't know. I mean, we certainly know that angels can come and go from heaven to the earth, and when they do come to earth, they come as human-like appearances. But they're, and stars being flung to earth in Revelation, being as it is in a sign at that point, is certainly referring to the fact that a third of the angels fell with Satan and aligned themselves with him instead of God, and they all rebelled. But in other contexts in Revelation that are not part of signs, we have literal stars falling to heaven. In one place, I think it's in chapter 6, which I forgot I wanted to go to. So let me stop presenting this and go back to the Bible one and go to chapter 6. I'm pretty sure it is, if I remember correctly. The Lamb is opening the seals. And this has not happened yet, because we are not to suffer the wrath of God, and the Lamb is God, and the Lamb will not pour out wrath on his own body, which the church is. Therefore, the church cannot be here for the opening of the seals. That's how I look at it. Then we have the sixth seal in verse 12, chapter 6 of Revelation. A huge earthquake, the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the full moon, interesting that it says that, I'll have to look at the Greek, became blood red. This all seems to be happening at the same time, which is dismissing the blood moon theory. Because some people say there was an eclipse of the sun and then there was a blood moon. That's a stretch to me. It's possible, but it's a stretch. I'm saying, look, it says there was a huge earthquake, first of all, and at the same time the sun turns black, and at the same time the moon turns red. That can be explained by a volcano or whatever supernatural thing. I don't care. It doesn't matter how it's caused. The fact is that these are happening all at the same time because the Lamb opened the sixth seal, which hasn't happened yet, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth like a fig tree dropping its unripe figs when shaken by a fierce wind. And associated with all this, the sky was split apart like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved from its place. Then, this is the interesting part too, the kings of the earth, the very important people, the generals, the rich, the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, and they said to the mountains under the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, because the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to withstand it? So we have that instances where the stars appear to be the ones in the, it says the stars in the sky. Whether those are angels or not, hard to say, but it's happening with a lot of other natural disasters, so to speak, even though they're supernatural disasters. I don't think we would say that anything else in this section, in this context, is an angel or angelic being. We have the earthquake, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the sky, and the mountains and the islands. In that context, I would expect that the stars to be literal, the lights in the sky, as things that are not angels. So I can't answer that question completely. Okay. And here again, if it's a hologram, we're in it. We are also holographic beings then, because this is our realm. This is what we're a part of. We are part of the creation. And whatever is true about the rest of it, it is true of us in the sense that we are made from the dust of the earth. So if it's a hologram, so are we, and in which case this is all our reality and it's all real to us, and simulation / hologram / projection is meaningless if that's true. So it all depends on your presuppositions. Like I said, if we're not there when nobody looks, that's an old religious idea that I reject, because even on a purely philosophical basis, we're part of it. It's our reality. And calling it something unreal that we can create with that we know isn't real, such as a projection or a hologram, doesn't change it. It doesn't affect our reality. Yeah, as far as what stars we say if we turn the light off right now, that's interesting. You would have to get past the sun. I don't know. Nobody's done that as far as I know. Yeah, lots of funny business. The gatekeepers, they have all the keys. They guard all the doors, as it was said in the Matrix. movie, but that's temporary. But I think if we try to get out before God says it's the time, that we're going to run into trouble. And even though the forces of evil are gatekeeping, it's because the earth is theirs for the time being and has been since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, because in that event, in my opinion, essentially Adam and Eve handed over the title deed to the earth to Satan. And that's why it's all been messed up since then. That's why God cursed it, because it belonged to Satan at that point, and Jesus did not dispute Satan's claim to have these things when Satan tempted him in the wilderness after his baptism. He said, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world if you will bow down and worship me. Jesus didn't dispute the claim. It would have been a stupid claim for Satan to make against Jesus when both of them knew it wasn't even true. Therefore, it was true, and the earth has been under Satan's control. That's why all the bad people are gatekeeping. But that is about to end. It will end painfully for those who are left here who are still in rebellion against God, but it will end. And yes, we've got some more. Thanks for providing those verses about geocentrism. Oh, yeah, the he and she. Okay, yeah. It's just the pronouns. Not a big deal. Let's see. Yeah, the lamb. See, people have this ridiculous idea that because Jesus came first as a lamb, that he will come the second time as a lamb. Now, he will come as a conquering king, the lion, and these judgments, even though they're instigated by the lamb is obviously symbolic of Jesus because it was a lamb who had been slain. So in using that terminology is clearly identifying this entity as Jesus, okay? That's what the purpose of the lamb imagery is there. Had it been the lion, you'd be kind of confused as to who this was opening the seals, because there's another lion in the four creatures that are around the throne of God. And so the scripture is just telling us through whether it's this lamb or whether the woman with the 12 stars, etc., who these entities are scripturally from that context, because this is the Bible, therefore the context of the Bible reigns supreme. And if people are going to take things from the Bible in a syncretistic approach, they can do whatever they want, but they can't call us wrong in our interpretation. And so the Bible itself says that this lamb is Jesus, but when he comes back, he will be the conquering one on the white horse with the sword and will rule the nations with a rod of iron. So Jesus will come back, and it won't be pretty for his enemies. And so these judgments are just the opening salvo of, God taking back Satan's realm and turning it back to the way it was meant to be. Let's see. Buy a lamb, tell people it's a poodle. People have done that, and you can give lamb cuts to poodles and make them look like it. It's pretty funny. So here again, with the 3D simulation, it doesn't matter. We're part of it. Therefore, for us, it's our reality. It doesn't matter how it was made. It's our reality. Yes, our spirit does go on. Our spirits are eternal, in my opinion. Some people think they're not. That's fine. But we do live eternally with God in heaven if we have pledged our loyalty to him, put our faith in the risen Jesus, depending on our time in history that we lived. We have to accept God as our Father, our Creator. And if you've done that, then you'll spend eternity with him. If you haven't done that, if you actively reject his offer of reconciliation and adopting us as his child, then he won't force you to live with him. And the only alternative to living with God is living without God. And by definition, since God is the source of everything that is good, then not God is everything bad. And that's why hell is hell, because it's getting away from God, and God is just giving people what they demanded. So, let's see. Earth is not light-based. I don't know what that means. When we're Christians, we're not of this world. Here again, the heavens are as real as the earth. If it's all a hologram, why wouldn't the earth be also a hologram? It's just a wish, a declaration. I need something more than that. I don't even see it philosophically why there's a difference. Yeah, Jesus said there's just no marriage in heaven. There's no procreation. There are no new beings being created there. in defiance of the teachings of Mormons. That's what Jesus said. I'm going with what he said. Here again, the spiritual, it is another realm. It is certainly, if you want to call it a dimension, but right here and now, we are in physical bodies that are of this earth, made from the dust, and it's our reality. And that's why I'm trying to emphasize the spiritual in most of my hangouts being Bible-based, is that's all that really matters. This other stuff is interesting, and there's nothing wrong with spending time on it as far as studying the heavens. It is the work of God. And in Romans 1, we are given no excuse for not believing there's a God, because it says the earth around us tells us there's a God. And in the Old Testament, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the earth shows forth the work of his hands. And so we do study the realm we're in because it proves God. So this is a very worthwhile endeavor, and yet it doesn't do you any good to know those things. And it says in 1 Corinthians 13, if I had all knowledge, if I possessed all knowledge, knew everything there was to know, but had not love, I am nothing. And so belonging to God and being in love and light truly, as opposed to people who say it but don't do it, is the most important thing. We have to have our priorities. That doesn't mean studying the cosmos is not important. It just means that it won't do you any good to know everything if you don't know God, and God doesn't know you. And by that, Jesus said, when his account of when he comes back in judgment at the end of the tribulation, he said, the sheep and goat judgment, and he says to those who thought they were doing good deeds for him, but were being very selective and omitting the treatment of the Jews during the tribulation, he said, get away from me, I never knew you. And as others have pointed out, there are celebrities that a lot of us know, but they don't know us. So we don't have a relationship. And it's all about the relationship of father and child, parent and child, God as our adoptive parent, and us as his adopted children. There has to be that relationship, and it can't be one-sided. We have to agree to it. That's the whole point of a relationship. Of reconciling, you can't force it on another person. Not even God will do that. It would be disingenuous. Anyway, that's what matters, is your relationship with your Creator, and I am trusting who the Creator is by Jesus, who rose from the dead. There's eyewitness testimony of this event in history, and so I'm putting my trust there, and I defy anyone, after all these years of encountering and studying other belief systems, I defy anyone to come up with a better, more substantiated story of who the real Creator is and whether there's a Creator. I mean, it seems obvious to me. I at least have something to go on, and the other religions don't, and the other philosophies don't. Simulatory. I don't know what that means. I just thought of something else I wanted to show about Revelation 12, which is that people misinterpret the interpretations. For example, it was chapter 17 I wanted to go to, because although it isn't true of this woman, it's true of, I said 17, there we go. True of the other woman in Revelation, the great prostitute and the beast. She is described, and she is interpreted. A woman riding a beast, she wears scarlet, she's drunk with the blood of the saints, and has committed adultery with the nations of the world, even though and the angel said to me, to John, he's telling what the interpretation is, so people can't interpret that. And the angel says, I will interpret for you the mystery of the woman and the beast. So this is the literal interpretation of the sign. The beast is not, is about to come up from the abyss. The inhabitants of the earth will be astounded when they see this beast, and it requires a mind that has wisdom. So it's something to think about, but you can't reinterpret it as something esoteric or moral lesson. And it says the 7 heads are 7 mountains the woman sits on. They are also 7 kings. I don't get the also there. Looking at the Greek, I think they're one and the same. The 7 hills, the 7 mountains, are 7 kings. And 5 had fallen by the time of John. One was currently in place, and the other had not yet come. When he does, he remains for a brief time. The beast that was, is not, that means to say existed in the past, was not at John's time, will come later, is an eighth king. That is one of the seven. Some think it'll be Apollo resurrection, whatever. The 10 horns are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. They're future kings. They have an intent, and they will give the beast their power. They'll make war with the Lamb, but the Lamb will conquer them. And then he says, the angel is still interpreting the vision. The waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The 10 horns will hate her and throw her off, etc. So as for the woman you saw, she is the great city that has sovereignty over the kings of the earth. The woman is a city. When people reinterpret the city as it's symbolic of something else, they're interpreting an interpretation. You can't do that. It's nonsensical, and it'll lead you astray. Let's see. Globe of the heaven. Okay, yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to. Google is doing the show hide thing. Held for review. I'll go ahead and show that because I don't think you're going to show any bad links there in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, Hugh Hefner died. I wonder if he's in heaven. I'm guessing not. There's no marriage in heaven. He wouldn't like it anyway. It would be hell for him. So maybe he should go there. He'll hate every minute of it for all eternity. But no, I'm, not knowing, not being the judge of souls, but the likelihood of what we do know about him is probably he's not there. Let's see. Yep, that's the deciding factor. You have to have reconciled with God through faith in the Jesus who rose from the dead. And if you didn't do that, there you go. You didn't want to be reconciled. You didn't want to be adopted. So what's God supposed to do? Force you to be adopted? He's not going to do that. Yeah. Yeah, most likely. I think we are still on one line. Probably scripture like make spaces between fit. Well, that's the thing, is there's conflict between the scriptures and other views. As I know all too well, a lot of other Christians know, is that I stick to prophecy in scripture because I believe it to be true. It's proven itself true over the centuries. And just like people will say that because NASA has proven itself to be a bunch of liars, that they will continue to be liars. And so I have a good basis for relying on prophecy in the scripture. And as far as things filled in, we know what we need to know. But as far as discovering our realm, we've got the tools of logic and reason and the scientific method that serve very well. And the Bible even says God is a God of order, not disorder. And in the Old Testament, God says, let us reason together. So I got to have something to go on, more than stories, more than speculations, more than wishes. I need more than that. So, but this is the line I'm following, and I am sticking to. Let's say Vatican City, I do believe is, and the officials thereof, whoever the specific occupants of the offices may be at any given time, that's all speculation, but those offices, that place, that entity and organization is certainly, in my opinion, the prostitute riding the beast. The beast is the Antichrist, so to speak, the first beast, the false prophet being the second beast in Revelation. And the first beast, in my opinion, they're by process of elimination, must be the Western world in some degree or another. So, and that beast will throw off the woman. So there will come a time in the middle of the tribulation when the Western world finally disposes and destroys utterly the Vatican, because the Vatican had been serving as a surrogate all these centuries, and then at that point, Satan will want to openly be worshipped. There will be no more tolerance of any facade of Christianity or anything else, and all other past religions will be done away with, as we saw in Daniel, I think in chapter 11, and the beast will demand the second beast will demand worship of the first beast, and that's when the mark is given and people are beheaded for rejecting it. it all ties together. It's hard to keep track, hard to keep it all in your head. And then I have a chart on the back of my wall that takes up the wall that is just for Revelation. There's so much that's going to go on, but it will happen quickly when it begins to happen. That's the indication of the Greek. So, anyway, this is my worldview, and I'm sticking to it, and it's no less sustainable than any other worldview, spiritual or not. I believe naturalism is a very narrow worldview that buries its head in the sand on things it can't explain, because once you do have faith in the things it can't examine, such as eternal regression, there's no first cause. The existence of anything proves that something started it, that itself was not started. There's no philosophical way around it. Eternal regression does not answer the question, in my opinion. So, anyway, this again went much longer than I expected it to go. I was just going to do a quick update of Sunspot movement. And like I said, it doesn't prove Earth shape. I think it does, everything considered, prove geocentrism. I think the most sustainable position as to the nature of the sun and moon is that they are spherical objects that go around us, but they have a nature about them, or something they're made of, so to speak, that defies explanation, and that whether they're projection or not is something that is still purely held by faith right now. They appear to be real objects that I can zoom in on, take pictures of, and whether anybody can touch them or not is the thing, but that still wouldn't make them unreal. It would, and it doesn't make them a projection until you find a projector. So who can say? But we have to know where observation leaves off and speculation begins, and that's something very few people seem to be able to keep track of. So anyway. Yeah, we all have our beliefs, but I think the Bible's accounts are at least as believable as any other. And for that reason, when people show prejudice against only the Bible and only the Christian faith, they are showing hypocrisy and an almost, if not completely, supernatural hatred of the truth. The real truth. Jesus is the truth. And I have as much right to make that claim and express my convictions as they do of their claims and convictions. And yet they keep singling out Christianity in the Bible, ABC, anything but Christianity, in spite of their repeated claims that they love and accept everyone. This is a common thing. I'm not just thinking of one person or a group of people. It's everywhere. Only the Bible, only Christianity, only Jesus is singled out for exclusion. And there must be a reason for that. And I wish people would consider that. Let's see, look at the chat a little bit more. And yeah, Christ allergy, pretty much. I mean, it's like I was saying the other day. The Bible calls Christians having the aroma of Christ, and how people react to that aroma tells a lot about them. It says people who are on the road to being saved will think of it as a pleasant, fresh aroma, a sweet smell, but those who are on the road to ruin will react in horror and disgust and cough and spit and just, get nauseated by it. So, and I've had that reaction. There are people who are, like I just was saying, when they encounter only Jesus and people who stand up for Jesus, they get nauseated, they get disgusted, they get enraged. They get bent out of shape completely. And so this should be telling us something. Yep, there it is, John 14:5. Thanks for that. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and there is no other way to be reconciled to our Creator. There's just no other way. And we Christians need to stand up and say it and not be doormats. There are too many times when I did stand up in a certain environment, not just one, where people would say, you're the only Christian who's making a stink about it. It's you that's the problem. All the other Christians are fine. They don't have a problem with us bashing Christianity on our Hangout. And there are at least 2 big channels, 3 or 4, if I really, am honest and complete, that routinely bash Christians and the Bible on panel. and the Christians are silent. And Jesus said to one of the churches in Revelation, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to vomit you out of my mouth. Jesus hates indifference. So if you're a Christian and you're in these hangouts where Jesus' name is being dragged through the mud, where the Bible is being burnt, where only the Christian faith is being discriminated against, stand up. Otherwise, what good are you? And I mean being harsh because we're out of time. There is no more time for pleasantries. As Darth Vader told the commander when he first got to the Death Star, you've been dispensed with the pleasantries, Commander. I'm here to put you back on schedule. And if that's the only good I'm doing, then, and most people don't like it. They think I'm doing bad. Even the Christians will say, you need to calm down. You get attacked a lot. It must be your fault. Like Job's friend said, you are being punished by God. It must be you've got some hidden sin. I've heard all of that. But it's to be expected, but it's not to be expected from fellow Christians. And that's what bothers me. The world, the unbelievers can act however they want, but I'm really disappointed in the Christian community in these conspiracy hangouts because they're not standing up. And souls can be lost because of it. And they're leaving me, just as another analogy to the Bible, where King David had committed adultery with Bathsheba, who was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who was, if you describe, look at the Bible's description of him, he was really an elite warrior. David, in order to try to cover up his infidelity, cheating with one of his top officers' wives, he got the guy off the battlefield and told him to go home and spend time with his wife because he was such a good guy. And he refused to do it because he was very disciplined. And David, in a rage, sent him back to the front lines and told his other officers to leave him there at the wall of the city they were attacking so that he would be exposed and killed. And that's what happened. And then God sent a prophet to Daniel to rebuke him. And this is what I feel like sometimes. I'm not at all comparing myself with any elite warrior. I'm just saying this is how the Christian community treats me when I stand up at the wall while their arrows are flying and they don't stand up with me. They leave me there alone. They withdraw into the shadows and I'm left there to take all the arrows. And this is why I don't go anywhere anymore. I've limped, crawled home from the battlefield because my fellow believers don't have my back. They jump on my back. I've had that happen for months and months in YouTube, and before that, years and years in the blogs and message boards. Fellow believers jump on my back. They don't have my back, and I'm sick of it. And that's why I don't go anywhere. So I just would wish that the Christian community would stand up, even without me, better late than never, because the time is short. We have all these signs. We better be paying attention. Let me look at the chat again. That's very good. And Jesus didn't help anything. He finished it. He redeemed mankind from Satan's control so that whoever chose could be reconciled with God. And we have been given, those who chose, a deposit guaranteeing our inheritance. We haven't got the full thing yet. We're still here in Satan's realm, enemies of the state, and we have the Holy Spirit as a deposit guaranteeing our inheritance. Yes, he did live a good path. He showed the exemplary way for a human being to relate to God. But he said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one gets to the Father but by me. So he is not a path. He is the path. He is not a truth. He's the truth. He's not a life. He is the life. There is no life outside of him. And so you cannot get reconciled to your Creator without him, without giving him your trust, your allegiance, and then living like he matters. And so there's just no other way. There's no way to compromise. You cannot partially earn your salvation. You can't earn a gift. You either accept the gift or you reject it. You can't buy it. Jesus paid the price we couldn't pay. He offers it freely. He will not coerce anyone, which is why it pains me that so many Christians do what I call selling fire insurance, where they try to use coercion or guilt or any kind of pressure or bribery, excuse me, to get people to become Christians. You can't do that. It's an offer of adoption. You either take it or leave it. There's just no other way. So we see Jesus. Jesus is it. As it says in the opening of the book of Hebrews, I think God in times past spoke to us in various ways through various people, but in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. That's an air of finality there. And as Paul said to the Greek philosophers on Mars Hill in Acts, I forget which chapter, he said, let me introduce you to the God you don't know. And that although God used to ignore, used to let things pass, he now demands everyone repent, which is to change your mind, accept Jesus as Messiah. At any rate, Jesus is not a way, he's the way. You have to trust him completely and tell him you trust him completely to be reconciled to God, and you have to do it with that purpose in mind, to be united with the Creator. There's no other way to go there. You can't earn it. You be good because you've been adopted, not to get adopted. It's a gift, and you can only accept it. So, but I really have to go. John 3:16, God loved the world in this way that, if you're reading the King James, it said God so loved the world. That's what it means. He loved it in this way, showing us his love by, as you know it in the King James, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. There it is. It's, put your trust in Jesus and his story. Well, actually, it's the beginning of the story. That's the beginning of birth. And then you grow after that. And you can't walk the path of Christ if you're not walking with Christ. And that means putting your trust in him. So, and if you're not taking heat for being a Christian, then you don't smell like one. That's all I can say. You declare yourself one by putting your faith in Jesus and being public about it. I mean, but I really have to go, and thanks for coming, and catch y'all later on another one of my intended to be short hangouts that tend to get longer because I ramble, but hey, I said I might. So anyway, see y'all later.